The Choric fleet, a shimmering armada of sleek, metallic ships, hung in the dark void above Earth like silent gods of war. They had arrived, but there was no immediate sign of aggression, no planetary bombardments or demands for surrender. Instead, the Choric chose subtlety. Their ships lingered just outside Earth's orbit, transmitting a continuous signal to every government on the planet, requesting a meeting. A subtle reminder that the universe was watching. General Jack Morgan, the head of Earth Defense Command, watched the images of the Choric vessels on his screen in a secure bunker deep beneath the Nevada desert. Morgan wasn't intimidated by the aliens' advanced technology. He had seen enough to know humanity's place in the cosmos. Earth had survived countless crises, natural disasters, nuclear threats, and countless wars among its own people. It was only a matter of time before they encountered something beyond their world. But this was different. The Choric didn't just look different, they felt different. Their ships were dark, smooth as glass, with edges that seemed to bend light itself. The designs were almost artistic, and there was a certain cold, clinical beauty to them that made humanity's more rugged spacecraft seem like toys in comparison. Still, Morgan wasn't one for thief tricks. If the Choric wanted to meet, then he'd meet them on human terms. When the Choric arrived in Earth's orbit, they didn't demand a show of force. Instead, they issued a simple statement via a broadcast across all communication channels. "We come in peace, to observe and understand." A strange choice of words, Morgan thought. If they were really as advanced as their ships suggested, why would they need to observe? Why not just take what they wanted? He sat back in his chair, chewing on the end of a pencil. "They're arrogant," said Olivia Brooks, his chief tactical officer, breaking the silence. She'd been staring at the screen beside him, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning the incoming data. "They think we're weak. Maybe they don't see a reason to be hostile." Morgan exhaled sharply. "Maybe. Or maybe they're calculating how much we can take before they decide we're worth conquering." Brooks shook her head. "I don't think so. Not yet. Not until they understand us. The way they're approaching this is clinical." Morgan finished for her. "Yeah, they've already made up their minds. They see Earth as a peaceful anomaly in a violent galaxy." He glanced at the screen again. But peace doesn't always last. As the Choric continued their observation from orbit, their commander, Azure, had already formed his conclusions. To him, humanity's history was riddled with fleeting moments of cooperation, but also weak moments where peace was just the calm before the storm. This wasn't a species to fear, but one to study. Peace, he decided, was just a facade. And behind that facade, something far more fragile. The Choric ships remained in orbit for days, seemingly harmless but quietly observing. Their sensors swept across Earth's cities, scanning everything from the most advanced military installations to the remote wilderness, where humanity's peace seemed to breathe most freely. Commander Sure watched the data pour in, analyzing each planet-wide scan, each broadcast, each gesture of diplomacy between the nations below. The Choric's observations were meticulous, almost clinical. Ashur, tall and imposing in his ceremonial armor, sat alone in his command chamber, a dark, angular room devoid of comfort. His reflective, multifaceted eyes, designed to see across multiple wavelengths, flickered with silent calculation as he reviewed the reports. His people, the Choric, had long ago conquered the violence that came with war. They had perfected their civilization through peace, yes, but that peace was forged through strength and an ironclad commitment to survival. He couldn't fathom a species that avoided conflict as humans did. There was an inherent flaw in that approach, and Ashur believed that flaw was humanity's fatal weakness. Weakness, Ashur muttered to himself, the word almost tasting foreign on his tongue. They do not prepare themselves for the true trials of the galaxy. He turned to his second-in-command, a Choric officer named Tal. Look at them. These humans believe that peace can sustain them. They have forgotten the most basic truth of existence, that survival is achieved only through domination or submission. Tal nodded, but his expression betrayed a hint of doubt. Perhaps, but their ability to coexist, to unify across such varied cultures, is impressive. Could we underestimate them? Asher's mandibles clicked in irritation. Impressive? Yes, but useless. His voice dropped low, barely more than a growl. Their unity is not forged in the fires of war. It is born of the same weakness we saw in their history, the peace that rots when the universe turns its back on them. They cannot survive without an enemy to conquer. They are a species without sharp edges. Back on Earth, General Jack Morgan received the Orcs' offer for an official meeting. As leader of Earth's defense forces, Morgan wasn't about to let some foreign power waltz onto his planet without understanding what it wanted. His military briefings were clear. The Orcs were no friends of humanity, at least not yet. The moment the Orc vessels entered Earth's orbit, Morgan had issued a silent command to his forces: stay vigilant. In Washington, D.C., Ambassador Lisa Harper was preparing to meet with the Orc representatives. A trained diplomat, Harper was the best humanity had to offer, skilled in the subtleties of peace and negotiation. But as she stood before the holographic display of the Orc fleet, a nagging feeling of unease crept into her thoughts. There was something off about the Orc presence. They radiated confidence, but not just the kind that came from understanding their superiority. No, there was something more ominous beneath it. It was as if they were already sizing humanity up, testing the limits of their peace. When the meeting finally took place, Commander Azur's envoy consisted of a handful of Orc diplomats and analysts, each of them composed and emotionally neutral. They spoke calmly, their language almost lyrical, but beneath their polite tones, a clear message was being transmitted. Humanity is not what we thought it was, but we're still not impressed. Lisa Harper took a deep breath before speaking, choosing her words carefully. We're eager to learn from your species, and we hope to share our experiences as well. Our societies are based on cooperation, not conquest. We believe that we can. Cooperation, Escher interrupted, his voice cool but heavy with disdain. Yes, but your kind cannot protect itself with cooperation alone. You are an anomaly in the galaxy, a curiosity, nothing more. The universe does not reward weakness. Your survival is a miracle, not a strategy. Harper's eyes narrowed, but she kept her voice steady. We've survived for millennia through collaboration, innovation, and resolve. If that is weakness, then we are not the species you should underestimate. Escher didn't flinch. He regarded her silently, his cold eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disdain. We'll see, he said finally, his tone betraying no emotion. We'll see if your resolve is enough when the galaxy's true predators take notice of you. As the Orc delegation left Earth, their message lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Humans may survive for now, but their peace will be their undoing. It didn't take long for the Orcs' predictions to be put to the test. The first sign of trouble came from the farthest reaches of human space. The Triton colony, a bustling settlement on one of Neptune's moons. The colony was small but vital, serving as a research hub for Earth's expanding frontier. It was also one of the first places humanity had established a permanent presence outside the homeworld, making it a prime target for any hostile force looking to make a statement. The Exarax were exactly that kind of force. The invasion came swiftly, without warning. A fleet of massive Exarax warships, each bristling with jagged weapons and armored with thick plating that seemed to absorb light, descended on the colony. The Exarax had no need for diplomacy. They were conquerors, brutal in their methods and merciless in their pursuit of domination. Their ships released a barrage of ion cannon fire, disrupting communications and power grids across the colony. Buildings erupted into flames as chaos erupted on the ground below. Back on Earth, General Jack Morgan was alerted to the situation. He had spent years preparing for an interstellar conflict, always expecting it to come from a species like the Orc, a technologically advanced, peace-driven empire that might see humanity as a stepping stone. But the XRX were something else entirely, ruthless, unpredictable, and completely without a moral compass. The first transmission from the colony was a garbled, panicked cry for help. "We're being overrun. They're everywhere. Systems failing. Can't hold." The transmission was cut off before they could finish. Morgan's fingers drummed against his desk as he took in the information. The XRX weren't just an immediate threat. They were an existential one. The species had a history of exterminating civilizations they deemed weak, and Morgan knew that if Earth's forces didn't act fast, Triton could fall, and with it, the fragile peace humanity had fought so hard to build. Morgan turned to Olivia Brooks, his chief tactical officer, who had been running simulations for months on possible alien threats. "We need to get to Triton," he said, voice steady despite the panic growing within him. "And fast." Brooks didn't need any further prompting. "I've already mobilized the fleet, sir, but we need to be careful. This isn't like dealing with pirates or raiders. The XRX aren't interested in negotiation. They'll fight to the last." Morgan nodded. "We know, but they haven't encountered us before." On the other side of the galaxy, in orbit around the battered colony, the Korak watched with detached curiosity. Commander Ashur had been alerted to that XRX incursion, and despite his earlier doubts about humanity's strength, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of anticipation. The Korak had always been prepared for the worst. After all, their civilization had risen from the ashes of countless galactic conflicts. But now, they were watching, silently, waiting to see if humanity's legendary peace could hold up under the weight of actual war. They were about to find out. When the first wave of XRX soldiers touched down on Triton, they expected an easy victory. The colony, nestled in the cold depths of Neptune's orbit, was home to a mixture of researchers, engineers, and civilians. The XRX had no intention of negotiating. Their objective was simple: wipe out any resistance and take control of the colony's resources. The soldiers deployed with mechanical precision, their heavy boots shaking the surface as they stormed the colony's perimeter. But what the XRX didn't anticipate was humanity's ability to turn adversity into opportunity. The humans of Triton had been living under the shadow of constant threats, aware that their distant position from Earth made them vulnerable to predation by hostile forces. So, they prepared for the worst. Within hours of the invasion, General Morgan's forces arrived in orbit, led by Olivia Brooks and her Special Operations Team, the Red Wolves. The Red Wolves were no ordinary soldiers. They were a highly trained unit of elite Marines, engineers, and combat specialists, and their mission was clear: hit fast, hit hard, and disrupt that XRX before they could establish a foothold. When the XRX first landed, they were met not with overwhelming force, but with subtlety. Humanity, for all its shortcomings in conventional warfare, had something that XRX didn't: ingenuity. At dawn, a series of sudden explosions rocked the XRX command center. It wasn't a bomb. It was a simple EMP device, rigged up by the Red Wolves using scavenged parts. The XRX, caught off guard, found their sophisticated electronic systems scrambled, unable to communicate or coordinate. It was a tactic that the Korak had never witnessed from humans, who, in their eyes, had been a peaceful species ill-prepared for war. Yet, here they were, sabotaging the most advanced technology in the galaxy, with nothing more than an old-fashioned strike. Olivia Brooks, with her calculated demeanor and a mind honed by years of military experience, led the charge from the front. She moved through the war-torn streets of the colony with cold precision, directing fire teams and deploying guerrilla tactics that kept the XRX off balance. Instead of trying to meet the invaders head-on, humanity used the environment to its advantage. The colony was a maze of frozen research facilities and underground tunnels, perfect for hit-and-run tactics. Tom Rodriguez, a civilian engineer turned combat strategist, was in charge of developing the unconventional weapons that would turn the tide. With a team of volunteers, some scientists, some miners, and a few soldiers. He quickly retrofitted old mining equipment to function as anti-tank weapons. The resulting makeshift weapons weren't pretty, but they got the job done. An industrial laser drill, meant for breaking ice, became a powerful weapon capable of cutting through Xrx armor with brutal efficiency. The Choric fleet, still in orbit, observed the unfolding chaos. Commander Ashur, despite his conviction that humanity was doomed to fail, couldn't hide his fascination. This was not the behavior of a weak, peaceful species. They had no intention of surrendering. They fought back with a fury that defied all logic, and they were winning. Ashur watched as the Xrx struggled to adapt to the sudden, relentless human resistance. The Xrx, who relied on sheer strength and overwhelming force, were now facing a force that didn't fight like any enemy they had encountered before. It wasn't about superior numbers or brute strength. It was about strategy, adaptability, and above all, determination. The Choric had believed humanity would crumble under the weight of this invasion. Instead, they were witnessing something far more dangerous, a species that, when cornered, became something far more terrifying than anything the galaxy had ever seen. As the battle for Triton raged on, it became clear that humanity was not only holding its ground against the Xrx, but pushing them back. The Xrx, used to overwhelming their opponents with sheer firepower and brute force, were now finding themselves in a fight they didn't understand. Every time they thought they had secured a position, human resistance would appear from the shadows, using tools and tactics they hadn't anticipated. But the true surprise for both the Xrx and the Choric was the involvement of humanity's unsung heroes, the civilians. These weren't soldiers, not by training, but they were the ones who had learned to adapt the fastest, transforming everyday items into instruments of war. Tom Rodriguez, a mechanic from Earth's industrial sector, had once been a quiet man, content with working on rusted engines and outdated machines. He never intended to be in a war, yet when the Xrx stormed Triton, it was his resourcefulness, not military might, that proved to be the turning point. When the Red Wolves needed heavy weapons to break through the Xrx lines, it was Rodriguez's group of engineers who got to work. With little more than mining tools, spare parts, and a few outdated blueprints, they began retrofitting old machines into deadly weapons. A mining drill became a siege cannon. Hydraulics and pulleys were re-engineered to turn large pieces of debris into giant trebuchets. Their most ambitious creation was a series of homemade drones, cobbled together from old mining rigs, capable of launching explosive payloads at the Xrx's armored transports. Rodriguez wasn't alone in this. Some of the most brilliant minds on Triton, civilian engineers, programmers, and miners, worked tirelessly to support the military. Without formal training, they applied the kind of innovation that could only come from necessity. Where the Xrx had their weapons of war, humanity had its ingenuity. And it was proving to be the deciding factor in the battle. On the surface, the fight was brutal. But the human ingenuity behind the scenes was what truly turned the tide. These engineers-turned-soldiers showed the world that it wasn't just a powerful army that won wars. It was the willingness to innovate, to improvise, and to never give up, no matter the odds. Back in the Choric fleet, Commander Ashur could barely contain his growing sense of disbelief. He had watched as humanity's resistance, led by skilled tacticians like Olivia Brooks, turned the Xrx invasion into a bloody quagmire. But now, as the Choric observed the humans' ability to innovate under pressure, something changed in Ashur's mind. He had expected the humans to fold. They hadn't. Instead, they had found ways to fight a war with nothing but their wits and sheer determination. These civilians, this untrained group, were demonstrating the very traits that the Choric had assumed humans lacked: adaptability, inventiveness, and an indomitable will to survive. They are not weak, Ashur muttered under his breath. They are something else. As the battle continued to unfold, humanity's momentum began to build. The Xrx, who had initially underestimated their foes, were now facing the full force of human ingenuity, and the Korek, from their distant observation posts, began to wonder if they had misjudged the humans completely. The battle for Triton reached a fever pitch. The Exarax were starting to falter, but they weren't backing down. Their relentless assault on the colony had become a brutal slog, with the invading forces increasingly spread thin, trying to maintain control over key installations while defending against guerrilla raids, traps, and the relentless tide of improvised weapons humanity had unleashed. Yet, despite their mounting losses, the Exarax were still an overwhelming presence, strong, relentless, and determined to wipe out humanity's resistance. The Korek fleet, still observing from above, watched the tide of battle shift. Their initial disbelief at humanity's ingenuity had evolved into a strange sense of curiosity. Commander Ashur, who had once believed the humans would collapse under pressure, now found himself grappling with an uncomfortable thought. What if humanity is more capable than we thought? His mind turned back to the strategic assessments he had reviewed before arriving at Earth. The humans had no galactic military presence. They had no massive fleet to speak of, and their history had been one of internal conflict, followed by periods of fragile peace. The Korek had assumed that a species so focused on cooperation and diplomacy would crumble under the weight of an invasion. Instead, they were seeing something completely different. Humanity's ability to endure, adapt, and innovate was defying the Korek's expectations at every turn. Back on the surface of Triton, General Morgan was facing a critical moment. The Exarax had escalated the conflict, deploying a devastating weapon to break humanity's will once and for all. A colossal warship, a behemoth of dark steel and firepower, entered orbit and released its payload, a massive planet-destroying warhead, aimed directly at the Triton colony's core. The warhead was a last-ditch weapon, a way to obliterate the colony and render humanity's efforts moot. It was a weapon built for one purpose: to break the spirit of any species that dared resist. If it succeeded, the Exarax would win, and humanity would have no recourse. General Morgan knew that, if the warhead was allowed to detonate, everything humanity had fought for would be lost. "We can't let them do this," Morgan muttered to himself, watching the countdown clock on his console. Olivia Brooks, who had been coordinating the defense from the front lines, looked up from her holotable, her face grim. "We have to stop it, or we lose everything," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We'll need to take out their flagship. It's the only way." Rodriguez's engineering team had already been working on a countermeasure, a system capable of disabling the warhead's guidance systems. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was their only shot. The team had managed to jury-rig a small group of homemade drones, designed initially to carry explosives for sabotage missions, into a squadron of interceptors. The drones would infiltrate the Exarax flagship, disable the warhead's controls, and buy them enough time to disable the entire weapon. It was a suicide mission, but it was humanity's only option. As the drones were launched, Morgan's team prepped for the final assault. Olivia's special forces were ready to strike at the Exarax flagship itself, and in the final moments, as the warhead's countdown ticked closer to zero, the unthinkable happened. The drones reached their target, breaching the Exarax ship's defenses with a combination of electromagnetic pulses and brute force. The flagship's core systems began to fail, the warhead's guidance system locked in an irreversible loop. A pulse of energy detonated from within the Exarax ship, a burst of EMP that cut through the flagship's defenses like butter, triggering a chain reaction. The warhead, unable to launch, shut down, and for the first time since the invasion began, the Exaraxes were forced to retreat. For a brief moment, there was silence. The human resistance had succeeded. Against all odds, humanity had stopped the destruction of Triton. The Korek, observing from the darkness of space, were silent. Their fleet watched as the Exarax warship slowly powered down, crippled by the humans' unexpected victory. Usher stared out across the void, his reflective eyes narrowing in deep contemplation. The humans had won, But they hadn't done it through brute force. They had done it through sheer willpower, resilience, and an ingenuity that defied all reason. Perhaps I was wrong, Usher muttered under his breath, almost as if speaking to no one in particular. The immediate aftermath of the battle for Triton was a mix of chaos and triumph. The XRX fleet, crippled by the successful sabotage of their flagship, was forced into retreat. The warhead, intended to obliterate the colony and shatter humanity's morale, had been neutralized in a desperate, last-ditch effort by human ingenuity. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Tactical, not strategic. The XRX weren't finished. They would regroup, they would learn, and they would come back stronger. But as the dust settled over Triton's ravaged surface, something unexpected occurred. Above the colony, still hovering in silent observation, the Choric fleet remained motionless. Commander Azure stood on the observation deck of his flagship, staring at the shattered remains of that XRX warship. His mind, usually so focused and unwavering, was now caught in a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had underestimated humanity, not just in terms of military strength, but in spirit. The way they fought, the way they adapted and innovated on the fly, defied everything he had believed about the so-called peaceful species of Earth. "They are dangerous," Azure murmured, almost to himself. His second-in-command, Tal, approached. "What are your orders, Commander?" Azure did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the image of humanity's makeshift drones, their ragtag fighters that had turned the tide. These weren't professional soldiers. They were engineers, miners, civilians, and they had done something the Choric never expected. They had won. The Choric had observed countless species across the galaxy, some who had embraced the path of war and others who had built their societies on peace. But none had reacted to invasion the way humanity had. Where other species might have cowered, begged for mercy, or submitted, the humans had fought with a desperate tenacity, clinging to their very existence like it was their birthright. "What are you thinking?" Tal pressed again, sensing the shift in Azure's demeanor. "I'm thinking we may have made a mistake," Azure replied slowly. "I've watched them, watched humanity. They are not just a peaceful species. They are something far more dangerous. They are survivors." Tal's brow furrowed. "Survivors?" "Yes," Azure nodded, his voice taking on a note of newfound respect. "It's not just that they fight. It's that they refuse to give up. They will do anything, to preserve their way of life. And I see now that we were wrong to assume they would crumble under pressure." Tal remained silent, absorbing the words. The Choric had never faced an enemy like humanity, one whose will to survive could overcome overwhelming odds, one whose sheer determination could turn the tide of battle. Azure turned back to the starfield, his fingers drumming on the edge of the observation panel. "We have misjudged them. They will not be easily broken." The Choric commander's thoughts turned to Earth, to the next phase of their plans. If humanity could withstand the XRX, what else could they endure? What would it take to truly defeat them? The Choric had always prided themselves on their superior technology, their peaceful approach to conflict. But peace, as Azure had begun to understand, was not the same as strength. He glanced at Tal. "Prepare the fleet. We will need to engage the humans directly, not as conquerors, but as participants in their struggle. We must see if their strength is as real as it appears." Tal nodded, understanding the shift in strategy. "We will watch closely, Commander. This will be a test." The Choric fleet descended from the stars like a silent wave, not with the arrogance of conquerors, but with the quiet determination of a species seeking to understand. They arrived over Earth's atmosphere, their vessels cloaking themselves in the upper stratosphere, visible only as faint distortions against the backdrop of the planet's sky. Their presence was not a declaration of war, at least not yet. It was an invitation to a reckoning. Humanity, bruised but unbroken, had no illusions about what was happening. Earth's military, led by General Morgan, immediately went on high alert. The Korok ships, despite their peaceful reputation, had proven capable of obliterating entire civilizations when provoked. But something was different this time. There was no immediate attack. No ultimatums. Hold our position. Don't engage until we have a clear signal, Morgan ordered, his face grim as he watched the screen showing the Korok fleet hovering above Earth. He knew that, if the Korok intended to strike, they would have done it already. No, this was something else. A test. The Korok were here to see if humanity's victory over the Xarax was just a fluke, if humanity could withstand their strength, their power. Ambassador Lisa Harper was called to the front. The diplomat who had once met the Korok in the early days of their first contact now stood in front of the world's leaders, preparing for the most important negotiation of her life. She knew that the Korok's interest in humanity was no longer purely academic. They had seen something in humans that they could not easily ignore. The Korok are not here to destroy us. Not yet, Harper said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. They want to test us. They want to see what we are truly made of. The Xarax invasion was just the beginning. This will decide everything. But despite her assurances, the world's leaders were divided. Some wanted to send a message. We will fight you if we must. Others, wary of escalation, pushed for diplomacy. Yet there was a universal understanding among them. Humanity had shown that it could stand firm against the most ruthless invaders, but could they now stand firm against the Korok, a force that wielded not just power, but wisdom and patience? At the heart of the Earth Defense Forces, General Morgan had an answer. He was ready for this, ready to stand up to the Korok, ready to face them head-on, if necessary. He knew what the Korok wanted, a test of strength. But he also knew something they didn't. The strength of humanity was not in numbers, not in technology, not in firepower. It was in something else, something far more dangerous. Prepare for the worst, Morgan said. But remember this. The Korok may be more advanced, more patient, but they haven't faced us before, and we're not like anyone else they've ever encountered. We fight not just for victory, but for survival. The world held its breath as the Korok made their move. A single vessel broke formation, descending toward Earth's surface. It was not an attack, but a challenge.